The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Radio Debang, a Mike Kahn presentation.
This is the Chris Heasley Show. Coming to you from Radio Debang, the North America's premier broadcasting network. A Mike Kahn presentation.
Heasley Radio Show, and on tonight's show we have breaking medical technologies, truly fascinating developments and ideas. And we're in the age of the Great Awakening right now. And I think from a medical perspective, that certainly is happening as new remedies and ideas and solutions are coming to us that we never knew existed before. And so we're going to discuss some of those tonight. And we have a man on the show, one of the most interesting men that I know in my life, Joseph Olson, an engineer, but more important than that, he is a fellow truther. And he will, when the establishment, when the political class wags their finger at us and tells us you cannot consider those theories because they are quote unquote conspiracy theories, that is nothing but a tactic, that is coercion to shut down possibly the truth. And Joseph and myself, we never listen to that message. We will consider an idea, a theory, a concept, regardless of how the corporate media or the establishment, regardless of what kind of label they put on them, we will not allow them to determine what we consider as worthy news, as worthy ideas. We will no longer allow them to dictate how our conversations are happening. Now it'll be facts, data, concepts, ideas, and some of which are the farthest reaches of the imagination. It is okay to dream, and that's the sort of ideas that we have here on this show. We have Joseph Olson here today, a fellow truther, and we're going to be talking about some of the most fascinating medical ideas, technologies, concepts, truths. So I'm looking forward to it. We have more than a couple to discuss, and we're just going to jump right into it. Joseph, how are you doing tonight?
Oh, great, man. Delighted to be here.
And I'm so glad to have you back. We've had him on to discuss some of the most fascinating topics. But tonight we'll talk about medical technology, so let's jump right into it. And one of the things that Joseph is going to talk about is there is a truther theory out there called medbeds. And the idea, the concept is that there is potentially a technology out there. We don't know if this is true or not, but Joseph is going to sort of go there a little bit, at least a little bit, which is that there's a technology out there that has never been made available to us that allows the regeneration of limbs. And we don't know if that actual technology exists today, but Joseph will provide some information on it. Joseph, you have the floor.
Oh, yeah, thanks. First of all, I'm a registered engineer, registered in Texas since 1983, self-employed, traveled the country. I've been to every state 20 different states I've done projects in. I've been to Europe 8 times. I've sailed the Nile from Abu Simbel to Gaza. So I'm pretty well-rounded as far as that experience. And I've always had an interest in medicine, but I didn't have good enough grades because I had to work my way through high school. And so I didn't make good enough grades to qualify to be in med school, but I was in a medical explorer group in high school. We met in a hospital and ended up seeing an autopsy when I was a teenager, which was interesting. And so I've had a lifetime interest in it, and I've also an avid reader. I've read like over 1,000 books. And my grandmother was an orphan at age 7 when her brother, her little brother, and her 2 parents were killed in the Spanish flu. And so I was always...
What year was that?
1918. And so I was always interested in the story of the Spanish flu because it didn't make any sense at all. And there was a great book by an author named John M. Barry. And John M. Barry had written a previous book that I'd read on the flooding in the Mississippi River, which involves a lot of civil engineering, which is what I'm trained in. And so I knew he was a good researcher and a good author. This book's like 400 pages long. It has like 40 pages of bibliography attached to it. And when I read the book, I thought I knew where it was going because I'd been programmed my whole life as to what the Spanish flu was all about. But as I got to the end of the book, it was like, this is so totally different than what I had been led to believe. that I had to reread the whole book. And out of all the books I've ever read, it's the only one I read cover to cover twice, because I started reading the first part and I went, well, if you were this misguided the first time you read this book, you need to finish reading the whole thing. So I read the whole book twice. Turns out it was a disease that was first surfaced at Fort Riley in Kansas, had nothing to do with Spanish flu, but because of World War I, Woodrow Wilson decided that it was against public policy and against the war if you said anything negative. And so they refused to admit that there was a pandemic. They refused to have quarantine like you would normally do. They refused to have any news broadcasting of it. They jailed hundreds of reporters and newspaper publishers that tried to publish statistics on it. They shipped these infected troops all across the country. They put them on the decks of freighters and shipped them over to the Eastern Front.
It infected our troops first, and
They
mostly,
infected them
correct?
first, yeah.
And why?
first.
How did that? Why would it go to our troops? Why did?
Because they were all inoculated with brand new vaccines, and most of them got like 8 or 10 doses in one jab.
So
When-
the Spanish flu was brought to us by vaccines.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. 100%. And so anyhow, so then they end up over in the trenches in Europe where there's lots of poison gas. So they end up having lung problems, and that just accentuates the spread of the disease. And when it finally ended up hitting in Madrid, because England, France, and Germany all had embargoes on any mention of there being a pandemic. And so this is a pandemic that didn't have a name until it hit Madrid and killed like 20,000 people. And they said, oh, well, it's Spanish flu. Well, that's what we've been having here for 2 years. Now we got a name for it. Well, that was pretty shocking. So then when the medical things started hitting here in Texas, and I already knew about the Event 201 where they were doing pandemic planning, and I'd known about
Right.
it.
So the Spanish flu, for us who survived the Wuhan flu, we sort of see a trend here where maybe these flus were not organic, but rather they were sort of developed.
Yes, it's a great bioweapon, and DARPA's got plenty of evidence that they were heavily involved in
So
all
it was
this.
developed, brought to our soldiers, and it's very interesting that it came to our soldiers first
Right.
through a vaccine.
Right. Okay. So flash forward, they had event Operation Lockstep, the Johns Hopkins University.
Now we're
and,
talking now. What year was this?
This was in 2010. So
Operation Lockstep in Johns Hopkins University.
Yeah, it was a pandemic planning session.
Plandemic.
Plandemic. Yeah. So they had all the same stuff that they did in Operation 201, but it just wasn't televised and it wasn't quite as big of an event. But it was called Operation Lockstep in June of 2010. So 10 years prior to the outbreak here, they had already had planning sessions. Well, the Event 201 was sponsored by Bill Gates.
And that was what year? Event 201.
It was in 2019.
And it was another planning operation.
Yes, and they had simulations of how they would do the news broadcasting, how they would cover it, and all the steps that they would require people to do for mitigation. And so they had everything completely planned out in November of 2019. Well, then when it hit and it was actually announced in January of 2020, it took a little while to percolate.
Literally just 2 months later.
Yeah, and then on March 19th of 2020, Abbott said that Texas needs to go on immediate lockdown because we've got this pandemic that's sweeping the earth and it's going to kill everybody in the state. And so that's when they started that. And I knew immediately that that was not what was being proper science because I'd read John and Barry's book. And so when they had the very first rallies against the lockdowns in Austin, and I think that was like 2 weeks later, so probably the first week of April, InfoWars, Alex Jones had rallies in Austin, and I went to those, and then I also went to rallies with the vaccine health groups. And Del Bigtree was up there, and so I attended about a dozen rallies in Austin over the course of the next 4 or 5 years. But I also attended one in Dallas, and this is the report. I was at the time a host at TNT Radio, and we were trying to come up with different material. And I'm also co-founder of Principia Scientific, which is a really good science website. And I attended the rally for Shelley Luther. She was a hair salon owner who was busted by the state of Texas because she cut hair 2 days before the governor said she could. And I knew all of the governor lockdown stuff was a violation of civil rights, number one. Number two, it was going to be completely ineffective. But this was a full program where you had the social distancing, you had the contact tracing, you had the masks, you had the forced vaccinations. Every bit of that was unnecessary government overreach and with no scientific basis. And they pretty much admitted 6 years later that was the case. So anyhow, she cut hair. The governor said, you can start cutting hair on Monday. And so she said, well, I'm not covered by the PPP. My 18 employees have not had a paycheck for 2 months. We're starving to death, and so we've got no other means of raising money. So she opened her hair salon. Even Ted Cruz went there on the Friday right after she opened and had his hair cut there. And so they were doing a banner business. They were making a whole lot of money. Well, then a judge in Dallas said, well, and I go through extensive information about that particular judge and the corruption in Dallas. But when they put her in jail, she appealed to the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the attorney general, and all of them did nothing. Her attorney did an emergency appeal to the state Supreme Court, and on Wednesday they said, this is illegal for you to hold this woman by habeas corpus. You need to release her immediately. And so on Thursday, after she'd been in jail for 3 full days, she gets out, and they said, well, let's have a rally for her. Well, the name of her salon was Salon a la Mode, and they printed up posters that said, remember the a la mode. And so this was in Dealey Plaza, which is where JFK was shot in Dallas, a very famous landmark at this particular point. And so this said, it may be the last public rally you have in Texas. And I went, Jesus, I've got to go. And so I drove up to Dallas, and everything was closed, so I couldn't do anything else in Dallas. I couldn't go out dancing or go to a nightclub and have a drink. I couldn't do anything because everything was locked down. And so the speakers was Alan West, who was at that time the chairman of the state GOP, Bob Hall, who's a senator from that area, state senator from that area, and a Dallas doctor named Yvette Lozano. And Yvette Lozano said that she had private practice in Dallas for 30 years. She had 12 employees, and that when the virus started first popping up, she gave all of her staff hydroxychloroquine, which is also, we'll just call it HCQ from henceforth. She gave all of her employees, and she had treated 30 patients with hydroxychloroquine. And the state medical board immediately started proceedings to remove her license. And the state pharmacy board says, well, we're not going to fill any prescription for hydroxychloroquine because it's not a treatment for COVID, even though President Trump had been using it and saying it was working really good. And so anyhow, I had 4 semesters of of chemistry in college, and I knew that hydroxychloroquine was just a stabilized form of quinine. So I wrote an additional article. This is Wu Flu Bat Stew News for you, and it's a lot of good research. And what it says, the tagline is, hydroxychloroquine decalcifies the pineal gland, also decalcifies the thyroid and the pituitary gland. Well, what happens is that your body, when you ingest chlorine...
Can I see that?
Yes, go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
When you ingest chlorine and fluoride, you displace the iodine because they're all in the period 7 in the periodic table. And so the iodine has a less affinity for the organic tissue, but it's absolutely mandatory to have a functional immune and hormone system. And so when you ingest fluorides, you displace that, and it has a greater affinity for calcium. And so bottom line is, by taking hydroxychloroquine, you're solving a problem that you have because of the diet that we have in America, where they feed you this chlorinated and fluoride water. And
okay,
so,
real quick, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Hydroxychloroquine decalcifies the pineal gland.
Yes.
Okay, so if I might say that, as I understand the pineal gland, it is like right behind the eyeballs. Is that correct?
It's at the base of your brain.
Base of your brain. And it is it's an incredibly powerful part of your body.
It produces adrenaline.
It produces adrenaline.
Yeah.
And it's also called the third eye.
Yes, because it improves your consciousness.
So it's critical to cognitive thinking.
Right. Right.
And there are theories out there that it is harvested for what's it called?
Adrenochrome.
Adrenochrome.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And adrenochrome is it's a very sick theory that
It's just adrenaline that's been oxidized by fear. And so what they do is they torture and the victims, they torture them, and then they cut the adrenal gland out.
so the dark element in our world tortures young people,
Right.
and takes that adrenal gland out because it's very, I don't know, I hate to say this, but nutritious or
No, it just gives you a high. It's a chemical high, very
Okay.
similar to some of the other stuff. Now, the thing about chloroquine is it's stabilized form of quinine, and quinine was used by Native Americans for at least 500 years prior to Columbus getting here because they found documented records of it, and it had been used all through the Latin America.
Can you say it one more time? It is, again, hydroxychloroquine. Say it again, please, about quinine.
Quinine is what it's derived from. It's an organic compound that's produced by plants. Plants are subject to the same threat vectors as human beings are, so they produce chemical protections against bacteria, mold, fungus, grazing animals. And so bottom line is they produce these chemicals, and there's a whole family of them. There's like 17 different ones. It includes caffeine and nicotine, which are readily available and used by a whole lot of people. And then it also includes all of the psychotropic drugs, and it includes strychnine and belladonna, which are actual poisons. But these are chemical defense mechanisms produced by plants that were isolated by the chemists to be just the quinine only, and then stabilized by the Bayer Company in 1935 as chloroquine, and then further stabilized during the war by the Nazis as hydroxychloroquine. And we stole every patent that was available in Germany when we finished defeating them. We went to every university and we went to every industrial research center, and we stole absolutely every bit of their technology, all of their patents, all of their lab research. Then we imported through Operation Paperclip all of the scientists that could help us understand that stuff. So a lot of our post-war boom was due to the stolen technology, and that appears to be one of the piracy things that wars are all about anyway. So getting back to what was happening in Texas, I still do love to go dancing, and one of the things that was highly effective.
Okay, can I just ask, though, hydroxychloroquine decalcifies the pineal gland. How is that, first of all, how does the pineal gland get calcified?
Well, it wouldn't get calcified if you didn't have any fluorine and chloride in your food stream. And not only that, you absorb it transdermally, you absorb it in the shower when you take a shower. So you're getting these other halogen family atoms that displace the iodine in your body and then has a greater affinity for calcium. So your body wouldn't naturally calcify those glands if you had iodine.
So through fluoride in our water and other things like that, toxins like that, we're consuming this. It's calcifying part of our body that's very critical to cognitive thinking, the pineal gland. And that's why they see that intelligence levels of communities where they have higher levels of fluoride in the water, they typically have lower intelligence levels. Right. So by taking hydroxychloroquine, you decalcify your pineal gland and you improve your cognitive abilities.
Right, and it's a full stream. This medicine is really important. It's on the WHO's mandatory medicine list. It's been in the doctor's PDR forever. It's like mandatory medicine. Off-label uses for hydroxychloroquine include lupus, chronic fatigue syndrome, arthritis. So it's a full range of things that can be solved with this one particular chemical. So anyhow,
so should people take it on a daily basis or only when they're ill?
No. Well, it's over the counter in all of Latin America, all of Africa, and all of the Far East, which they had almost no amount of COVID in any of those countries because people were taking hydroxychloroquine. The normal dosage is if you don't have malaria, you take it 1 tablet a week, and that's the normal.
So even for healthy people, it's a good idea to
yeah, it's a good thing to have just for healthy
Okay,
people.
so if I can bring this conversation to a circle here, you started out talking about how our government poisoned our own soldiers in 1910, the World War I troops, approximately 1910. They poisoned them with a vaccine that gave them what ultimately was called the Spanish flu. It spread the globe largely via our own soldiers as they went to Europe, as they went across the American continent. And when you're bringing this all to a head, are you sort of now talking about how hydroxychloroquine comes out to actually remedy the modern version of the Spanish flu, which is the Wuhan flu of 2020? And while people are learning about this technology, our government's trying to stop that technology.
Right, and they did the same thing with ivermectin, which is a Nobel Prize-winning drug, which is an antibacterial and anti-parasite drug. So then I did another article at Principia Scientific, Last Waltz Across Texas. This gives an educational background of the 4 people that could have controlled this particular epidemic.
May I see that, please?
Oh, yeah. This was Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Patrick, Ken Paxton, the Attorney General, and then the head of Health and Human Services in the Senate, who had been a state rep, and her education was that she has
Real quick, Greg Abbott, Ken Paxton, and who are the other two?
You
need the paperback?
No. Ken Paxton,
Greg Abbott, Ken Paxton,
Lieutenant Governor Patrick, and then Lois Colkhurst.
Oh, Lois Colkhurst, state senator.
Yeah, state senator from the Brenham
And they
area.
could have done what?
They could have had hearings. They could have had. They could have demanded a special session. The state lieutenant governor could have said, "I'm sorry. The state law is that you're not allowed to have a lockdown or any type of mandatory measures for more than 2 weeks without calling a special session." That was a violation.
They could have intervened in the hysteria that was the Wuhan flu, and endorsed or brought back normality to our lives by restoring freedom.
Right, and Ken Paxton did a lot of good things, but he didn't stand up during during that particular period of the Wu flu thing. So that's okay. So then I wrote another article. Turns out Moderna, in order to grow the vaccines that they use, they normally use like fertilized eggs, and they inject them with an inoculated form of virus, and then hopefully whatever the chicken it's growing is going to produce antibodies, and then they harvest those antibodies, and that's what becomes your vaccine. The problem
Real quick, I'm sorry, bud, you're going way too fast. In the audience, it's if you don't mind me saying, you are incredibly intelligent, and the stuff you're studying, you know, like the back of your hand. But this is the first time for the audience, and so I have to ask you to slow down and please say the whole sentence one more time.
Okay. Bottom line is, if you believe in the germ theory that viruses are actually a germ, there's a pretty strong body of evidence that they're actually exosomes, which is just waste particles that are completely inert. But bottom line is, if you buy into the vaccines being functional, and there's some proof that there is, and there's a lot of proof that it isn't. But anyhow, in order to create vaccines, you take the virus and then you isolate it, you inoculate it so that it's an inert virus. You inject it into.
What does inoculate mean? You make it benign?
Well, you irradiate it. You is generally the way they do that, and so it's if it was alive, it's dead.
You make it harmless.
Right, you make it harmless. But viruses can't reproduce on their own. They have no ability to replicate their own DNA. So what they do is they take a host and they attach to the host, but they absorb a little bit of the host DNA every time they form a new.
Why do they do that?
Because that's their only means of replication.
Why do they need to replicate the virus?
Because that's the only way they can have more viruses. So what happens is when you affect a cell, theoretically, if you infect a cell with one virus molecule, the virus will go ahead and use that, hijack the reproductive system of the cell and start producing nothing but little viruses until it swells up to the point where there's thousands of little viruses inside the cell, and it breaks the cell wall, and that's what spreads the viruses throughout your system.
And why do they need to do this?
Well, we don't know why viruses are here. I can't think of a real good positive thing for having them, but it's just like mosquitoes, you know. You don't really enjoy mosquitoes and ticks and tapeworms and a whole bunch of...
So are they replicating the viruses to learn how to kill the virus? Is that what you're saying?
They're replicating it in order to create the antibodies that they seem to think will give you protection from the virus. So that's what the whole theory is. And there again, it's a theory that needs to be questioned. I would put it at this point.
Real quick here. So this Wu flu at warp speed, what is the point of this right here?
Okay, that Moderna was using insect larvae, so they were growing their COVID-19 vaccine inside living insects because you and I just don't have enough insect DNA in it. That's a way to pick up some. It just shows you.
So Moderna was growing the COVID-19 remedies, the vaccines, inside of bugs.
Right. And in the process of growing, the virus itself is going to absorb a little bit of DNA from whatever its host is. So if you're growing it in
the vaccine will take a little bit of bug DNA, insect DNA, ant DNA, whatever it is, and put it in people.
Yeah.
So while they're coming to us telling us that supposedly this Wuhan flu came to us from Wuhan, China because of someone eating a bowl of bat soup, they're actually giving us something that's equivalent to bat soup, where they're giving us DNA from an insect.
Right. Because, we don't have enough insect DNA. So that was just one of the little troubling features. Another article I wrote was Right to Try Voodoo. And turns out that Colorado passed a bill called the Right to Try in 2014. And because Texans and Coloradans have a whole lot in common, we had people that went up there and went, yeah, this is great. You can go to other countries and get techniques and medicines that you're not allowed to have in America, and they are legal in Colorado. So this is the right to try law. We need to pass that in Texas. So it was introduced in the state legislature in 2015, went nowhere.
Real quick, right to try law came out of Colorado, right?
Right. First in the nation.
And the whole point of it is that you can try any remedy.
Right.
The whole idea is let's get the let's get our entrepreneurial juices flowing and start using our mind, our greatest type of thinking to think outside the box and create possibly new remedies for our ailments.
Right. And it goes back to the same thing with Laetrile, which is apricot pits used for cancer treatment. And there's evidence that the guy that was developing that was on the right track and that he was persecuted for it. So that's basically the way the medical racket works, is that they don't want any outside interference with their game plan.
Okay, real quick. We're apricot pits.
Yeah.
Someone had the theory that apricot pits would remedy what?
It was a cure for cancer.
Is it true?
There was a doctor here in Texas that ended up going to jail over it, and you can still go to clinics down in Mexico where there's people that swear it solves the problem. But we'll go a little bit further. The next article I wrote on this right to try voodoo was that it was introduced in the United States legislature in 2018, passed both houses and breezed through, signed by the president. So it was national law in 2018. But our Congress in Texas only meets for 5 months every 2 years. And so in 2019, when it met again, they said, hey, let's pass a bill that says you have a right to try. And so they passed it here in Texas, and all of them come back and thump their chest about, I'm such a great legislature, I gave you the right to try. Well, it was already national law, so you just rewrite the national law and put your name on it so you can come back and advertise yourself as being wonderful. So this is an opening statement in my article on white tribe voodoo. 2 Australian scientists, Dr. Robert Warren and Dr. Barry Marshall, won the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 2005 for their pioneering cure of peptic ulcers. Peptic ulcers are the most common human infection there is. It's over 5% of the population suffers from peptic ulcers. What's most revealing about this established science is that these gifted, dedicated doctors made the discovery in 1982. Actually, it was announced in 1982. They made the discovery in 1978. What they discovered was that everybody that had a peptic ulcer also had a bacteria in their stomach called H. pylori. And if you took antibiotics, once you cured the H. pylori bacteria, then you cured the peptic ulcer. And what the standard pharmaceutical philosophy was that you had too much acid in your body and you needed to take something like Pepto-Bismol or Rolaids or Maalox. You needed to take something that would coat your stomach with an alkaline that would counteract the acid, and that's how you would treat it. But it was like a daily treatment. So they would rather keep you on Maalox or Pepto-Bismol for your whole entire life than to ever treat something. This is like a $5 cure. So what Dr. Marshall did is he said, I'm got this isolated bacteria. I'm going to infect myself with it. Now I've got peptic ulcers. Now I'm going to give myself a $5 antibiotic shot. Now I don't have peptic ulcers. And then the Australian government said, okay, we'll let you do human testing, but you have to do blind testing where half the people don't get treated. And it took 4 years for them to get enough testing before it was finally approved by the Australian government in 1982, but it wasn't approved by the FDA until 1992. So there again, just gives you an idea how nefarious the medical industry is. And so anyhow.
Yeah, I guess my point of going back to that apricot story is that what you're basically saying is that they potentially had a cure for cancer that the establishment shut down.
Oh, and then there's also ample proof that that anti-parasitic drugs like fenbizidol and ivermectin also are good cures for cancer. And so bottom line is they don't want you to get too healthy. Matter of fact, if you're healthy at all, you're not a patient.
Yeah, it's the break-fix model. They break us so that they can always fix us.
There you go. Yeah. So anyhow, I was invited to be a guest on Coast to Coast AM. This has 600 radio stations, and
hey, bud, let me do my advertisement real quick if you have a second.
Sure,
okay,
go
great.
ahead. Yeah.
So I'm gonna break it up here just for a quick second and talk about our featured product of the day, which is, if you know anything about this show, we're talking about the X39 patch, because it is the most incredible medical technology outside of apricots. It is the most incredible medical technology to possibly ever hit mankind. It's the X39 patch. And what it is photolight therapy. It comes to you through a patch. I have it right here on my skin. I don't know if you can see it there, but I put this patch on for 12 hours a day. And the whole concept is this: your body emits light. It's true, your body emits light. And what this patch does is simply redirects the light back into your body and triggers something called the copper peptide. And the copper peptide is one of the most dominant peptides in the body, and it is a peptide that largely affects aging. And when it triggers that copper peptide, what it does is it awakens dormant stem cells. And stem cells are the essence of life. Joseph is going to talk more about stem cells in a minute, but stem cells are the essence of life. And when a baby's born, it's flush with stem cells, it's overflowing with stem cells. And then each passing decade, those stem cells go dormant, they go asleep. What this patch does, it just simply awakens the stem cells that are within you. Now think about stem cells. The big thing today is to go get stem cell injections, which is a very controversial method, because they're taking them from aborted babies. They take stem cells from aborted babies, and then they inject them into people. It makes them look younger. It makes athletes get back on the field, all these things. We're not doing that. It is not injecting anything in you. This is a non-transdermal patch. There's no ointments or salves, nothing of that. It's just projecting light into your body. It wakens up your existing stem cells, and the results are amazing for so many people. This company, LifeWave, who produces the X39 patch, is one of the fastest growing companies in the world. It went from 20 million to 320 million in just 1 year. The product is flying off the charts. Why? Because this patch is age reversing. It reverses age. So the clinical trials have been done, and the clinical trials have shown that with 6 months of use, it reverses the age of the heart, as I understand it, by up to 8 years. Okay. And what does that mean for the body? It extrapolates outward on the body in all different ways. It benefits all different people in all different ways. But the first thing that's important to know is that it goes to work on your internal organs and strengthens them. Okay. And in doing so, it brings you to a more youthful state. And then the benefits: more energy, lack of aches and pains, lower back pain potentially goes away. People have said that it makes gray hair turn back to its original color. It makes bald spots get filled in. Go look at the testimonials online. Just simply type in X39 plus any testimonial online, and the testimonials are abundant and they're overwhelming. So it does all these things, but there's one thing out there that every lady should know, and it is that it makes you look younger. Without question, it turns the age back on appearance. It makes our people look younger. And so it's the X39 patch. And to learn more about it, text the word Patriot to 330-606-2304. It's the price of a cup of coffee a day, $3 a day, about $100 a month. And for the core package is $295 for a 3-month supply. All right, guys, appreciate it. Back to Joseph. We're going to talk now about I think one of the most exciting things, one of the most interesting topics, how salamanders regrow limbs. Go ahead, please.
Well, just to reiterate one of the points that you just made about the body emitting light, yes, it does. Anything I've written over 100 articles on global warming, green energy, and peak oil. I had to have 2 semesters of thermodynamics in college, so I kind of understand that particular portion of physics. And anything with a temperature over 0 degrees Kelvin emits electromagnetic radiation. For a human being with a body temperature of 98.6, you radiate in the 10 micron range, which is why you're visible with an infrared camera. So yes, your body is emitting in the electromagnetic spectrum, but it's also absorbing in the electromagnetic spectrum. And one of the times I was going to be on Coast to Coast AM, I was invited by guest host for the Thanksgiving weekend in 2020. It was the November 27th show. He said, I want to discuss the biomagnetic electric effects. And I said, okay, well, he gave me 2 weeks notice. And I said, this is something I'm not very familiar with.
What's it called again? The
bioelectromagnetic effects. And so we know that electricity affects biological organs, but, has anybody really studied it? And so I contacted a couple of people that were in that field. They said, what you need to do is read a book by Dr. Robert O. Becker called Body Electric. And so because I was going to be on Coast to Coast AM, and they need to have something that they could put up on their website as a page that would explain what was going on. And because science is a lot visual, and when you're just on an AM talk radio program, I can't wave my hands and I can't show you diagrams. And so it's really important to be able to explain things in a little more detail. So we published this at Principia Scientific on November 25th, and it's my review of that book called Body Electric Secrets. And bottom line is, Dr. Robert O. Becker was an orthopedic surgeon at the Veterans Administration Hospital in Syracuse, New York. In his 25-year quest for the Holy Grail of orthopedics, which is regeneration, is documented in his book, Body Electric. Anyhow, this is a really great article. And what he had done is that he had patients that were sometimes would have multiple fractures, and some fractures would heal and some wouldn't. And so he was wondering, why is there a differential healing within the same body, number one? And number two, I was always curious about why a salamander, you could take and amputate a limb and it would completely regrow the limb. You could amputate a side of his...
if I may say, because we're talking about LifeWave and the X39, I'm studying David Schmidt a lot, who is the owner inventor of LifeWave, the X39 patch. And he was studying this stuff before any aging technologies really have... Right now, they're kind of hot. But before anyone else I heard ever studying it, he was on that topic. And he would study, as I understand it, plants that would not age or something of that effect. So what I'm trying to say is that where Joseph is now talking about animals that can regrow limbs, there has always been under the radar a movement of intellectual men studying these ideas that we were never really paid attention to. And I think it's on purpose. Everything Joseph is saying, we come across these ideas, the medical establishment squashes them time and time again because they want to sell us an oil-based pharmaceutical chemical drug that goes towards the break-fix method, always have us slightly broken so they can always be fixing us. The other idea is Tesla. I mean, as I understand it, Tesla was studying light and light therapy. And again, he was another man. I think he was killed. If you read about how he died, I think he was murdered. And again, it goes along with that idea. There is a political establishment that does not want us to know the truth. And I really think that on this show today, we are scraping the surface of some really groundbreaking ideas.
You also had a guy named Raymond Rife who invented the electron microscope. You can't see anything smaller than the wavelength of the light you're looking at. So when you're looking with visual light, you're in a certain little spectrum. If you've got something that's smaller than the wavelength of the light can't bounce off of it and you can't see it, which is why you can only go like 20,000 power with an optical microscope. And so what he figured out is if you used electrons, you could bounce electrons off of an object and you could see with a great increase in detail. And that's why he invented the electron microscope. But he also discovered that when you were irradiating certain things with the electrons, you could actually kill certain things, and you could kill them at certain frequencies. And so he started developing a whole series of things that he could cure with electric beams in the 30s. And they FDA came in, claimed he was practicing medicine without a license. He said, "I'm not practicing medicine. I'm made a machine that actually works, and the medicine's being practiced at San Diego University, and they're having enormously good results. And here's the whole list of things that I can cure in your body just by giving certain wavelengths of radio waves into a body to kill these pathogens." And they said, "Nope, you're going to jail." So they busted up all of his equipment and put him in jail. So that's
What year was that?
1935, I think, is when he ended up going to jail. But it was in the 30s that
It was like
you can
that guy Tucker who made the car that would have put all the other car manufacturers out of business, and he was taken care of.
So anyhow, getting back to Robert O. Becker's work, what happens is when you get an injury, your body immediately sends a whole bunch of red corpuscles down there. And the red corpuscles are the only cell in your body that doesn't have a nucleus. In order to carry more hemoglobin, which is the iron molecules that carry oxygen and also remove the carbon dioxide, you need to have as much hemoglobin in each corpuscle as possible. So when it goes to the injured site, it causes what's called a blastosphere. And the blastosphere is nothing but a whole bunch of red blood cells that are trying to stop whatever injury there is and then start doing the repair process. Well, in human beings, the repair process ends up giving you a nice long scar, and then if you've got something that's amputated, you got nothing to do. But with the salamander, they send an electronic signal to the blastosphere, and the blastosphere goes, "Oh, you want us to become bone, and you want us to become marrow," and so the various corpuscles start forming all of the missing cells that are in the body. These are the original stem cells, and these are the ones that are not available as you grow up as the higher forms of life, the mammals and the reptiles, but are readily available in the salamanders. And what it does is it uses a millivolt and milliamp circuit inside your body, and in order to have a DC circuit, you have to have two means of travel. It uses the motor and sensory nerves as the wiring network, and the salamander, on no ability of its own, sends electronic signals that are the perfect signal to transform each one of those blastosphere corpuscles into the necessary tissues to completely regrow things. And they had perfected.
Is there any other animal that does it?
Well, what Becker's team did is that they started experimenting with. There's a whole bunch of lower life forms. You can take a planaria, cut it in 4 pieces, it'll grow 4 planaria. You can take a starfish, cut it in 5 pieces, it'll grow 5 starfishes. So, but those are regeneration things that were lost along the evolutionary path for who knows why. But bottom line is, in 1965, they started experimenting on lab rats, and they could amputate a lab rat's limb, or they could decordate its spinal column and completely regrow it. And they said, this is absolutely incredible. But the problem was that Robert O. Becker...
Real quick, how did they do it? How did they regrow it?
They used the same frequencies that the salamanders was using.
They replicated what the salamanders were doing into a rat.
They replicated the DC currents in milliamps and millivolts that the salamanders were sending in signals to their injured body parts. And so when you decorded the spinal column on the rat, it changed the hemoglobin into nerve cells.
I mean, that's like amazing. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, man.
Yeah. Nobody'd be in a wheelchair. We'd all be walking around.
Yeah. Greg Abbott would not be in a wheelchair today.
Yeah. If you had your arm amputated, you'd grow a new arm. Yeah. All this stuff was available theoretically in 1965.
Theoretically, because they got it to being able to replicate it from a salamander to a rat.
But the problem was that in the process of studying that, he also discovered that there was a whole lot of interference from electrical systems, particularly high voltage transmission lines, and a whole lot from radio waves, which had increased enormously, and that there were health negatives to those. And so he was researching that. And the problem is that all of the medical research goes through the Department of Defense. So they're the ones that ultimately control the NIH funding, and he was working at a veterans hospital, so they had no problem cutting his funding off. And
so the NIH, our government, cut his funding off.
Yeah, and DARPA was heavily involved, which is an Army program, was heavily involved at Fort Detrick with the creation of the Wu flu disease. So anyhow, so they ended up cutting his funding off because as wonderful it might be to be able to regrow limbs, if you're going to affect the capital investment of General Electric and Westinghouse in the transmission line services and generation services, and you're going to affect the profits of Motorola in the radio transmission, you're not going to get any funding from anybody.
But if I may say, if you consider the medbed truth or theory, I want you to think about it. It's not that far off of a theory, because imagine there are government officials that know that this amazing technology by Dr. Becker exists, and did they just lock it up and put it in a box and put it away? Or could they possibly have continued to secretly develop the technology and then make it only available to the elites?
Well,
because the whole concept of that there is this, it is a theory. It exists within the truth of theory. You can go on BitChute, type in medbed, but the whole idea is that this technology exists. It's fully developed. They've taken Dr. Becker's theories, they've developed it all the way out, and they're regrowing limbs, they're turning back age, all this stuff. But go ahead, please.
Yeah, and Dr. Becker didn't want his research to be abandoned, and so he published his book in 1985. And I attended 50 medical freedom rallies, and I talked with hundreds of doctors and nurses in the state of Texas in the intervening 5 years that this scam has been going on. And none of them had ever heard of his book, and none of them were aware of any of the things that he discussed.
I mean, I have done so much research on this type of stuff just from a layman's perspective. I've never heard of this theory until you told me about it, Joseph.
And then just by serendipity, we were a host on TNT Radio. We were interviewing a pediatrician named Michelle Pirro. She's a 40-year pediatrician. She has her own GMO website, and she's pretty famous. And we were interviewing her, and just by chance, I caught a Del Bigtree interview with Dr. Susan Humphreys, and she had just gotten her medical certification to be a gynecologist, and she decided she'd dedicate some time, and she went down to Latin America, and she was going to teach midwives how to deliver babies. And so she's in there watching the baby being delivered, and she reaches over for some cord clamps and started.
Okay, we're talking cord clamps now. What are we talking here?
The hidden abuse of cord clamps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And what was this doctor's name again?
Dr. Susan Humphreys. And when this article is published at Principia Scientific, I put a note.
The article is called "The Umbilical Cord Clamping: The Hidden Medical Abuse." Go ahead, please.
And that's a really interesting article, and it's particularly interesting if you know anybody that's in the gestation cycle and they're getting ready to have a baby. They need to know about this. So anyhow, Dr. Humphreys was down there in Latin America and watching these babies being born, and she reached to get the cord clamps, and the midwives went, no, watch this. And so the baby pops out, and then they wait for the placenta to be delivered. And then the placenta pops out, and the placenta sits there next to the baby and sits there and pulses. And she went, I never knew it did that. And so anyhow, she started doing a little bit of research on it. Turns out cord clamping was patented by a doctor in New York in 1899 as a way to reduce the maternity ward blood stains on sheets and make the laundry easier to work. And so bottom line is, when you have a baby in America, your little baby pops out. They put a cord clamp on each side of the umbilical cord, cut the cord in the center, and then say, here's your baby. And then they wait for the placenta to be born, and then it's rushed off somewhere else. Well, guess what?
I wonder if that guy really wrote that patent for the purposes of keeping linens clean, or if he had.
No,
if he knew that.
No, he had no idea what's fixing to come. What happens is that when your head is, as a baby, it's like a rubber ball. And when it goes through the cervix, which is the tightest part of the birthing process, it pushes the blood that's in the baby's head through the umbilical cord back up to the placenta. And then after you're born, the placenta starts sending that blood back to the baby. And even after the placenta's been delivered, it will sit there and pulse and increase the blood supply into the baby. This article, this was on a Saturday night, and I went out dancing, and the program is produced by my co-host, John O'Sullivan at Principia Scientific in England. And so as soon as the program was over, I said, John, this is a really important topic, because when we talked with Michelle Pirro about this, she had never heard about cord clamping being a health issue, and she'd been a pediatrician for 40 years. I said, this is something we need to research on. And he goes, well, why don't you do some research on the articles and write an article, and we'll put it in Principia Scientific. So apparently I got him excited enough that he said, I'm going to do some research. So I went out dancing. I got home at like 1 o'clock, crashed, got up at 10 o'clock, which is 6 hours later than it is in England. And first thing I did was pull up umbilical cord clamping, research by Cleveland Clinic, 10 reasons not to cord clamp. And I went, oh, this is interesting. I sent it to John O'Sullivan. He said, I've already written an article on it. I went, you rat, you didn't even give me co-signing authors on it, but that's cool. Let me see what you got. He went to British Medical Journal and Lancet, and both of them had 10 reasons not to cord clamp. So here you have 3 prestigious medical journals that say, what are the problems of having cord clamping? Well, one of them is low birth weight. The other one is injuries that don't heal, because what that baby's blood is being forced back into the placenta, it's stem cell blood. And that's what they're doing. They're taking your baby's placenta stem cell, harvesting their blood, and any injury that the baby suffers coming through the birth canal is going to be immediately aided by healthy stem cells that your mother has produced and wants to give to you, that the doctors and nurses are taking away from you. And this is still a medical practice today. This needs to be 100% outlawed. And we need to make sure that people have access to their own stem cells, and that's what there's a lot of people that are doing cord saving, but then you're counting on a system that you're not sure that's legitimate. But bottom line is, no baby needs to have its stem cell blood removed by any medical team for any excuse at all.
I don't know, man. Got nothing to say. I don't know. It's like amazing. I mean, those precious stem cells are being deprived from our infants at their most vulnerable stages, at their most precious stages.
And with the right electrical signals, you could grow your own stem cells, and they got that technology, and they're hiding it from you. With the right radio frequencies, you could kill every pathogen that was in your body without having any harmful effects on the good tissues, but they're keeping that away from you. That's from the Raymond Rife experiments. So bottom line is, you could have a whole different spectrum of medicine if it was truth-based medicine instead of allopathic medicine, which was created by John Rockefeller and his Fexner report in 1910, and was forced. And one of the other articles I wrote an article about Typhoid Mary. And here was a woman that they claimed was the root cause of typhoid cases in America, and they put her in solitary confinement for the last 30 years of her life because she refused to have her pancreas removed. And they said, well, this was in like 1901. And so they said, well, we found high concentrations of typhoid germs inside the pancreas, and we're pretty sure if you remove the pancreas that you will be able to solve the spreading of typhoid fever. And it was like in 1901, the surgeries were 50% terminal anyway. So if you went in for surgery, and then the pancreas is an important organ that when you remove it, you're never going to function properly, and you're going to have a shorter life anyway. So she elected to spend the rest of her life in solitary confinement as opposed to having her pancreas removed. And then they had the case of Massachusetts versus, and I can't remember the guy's name right now, it's a Supreme Court case, but it was a case where the state of Massachusetts was forcing mandatory smallpox shots. And the guy said, well, I don't want to take smallpox shot. And the fine for it was that you had to pay like $20 if you didn't want to get Massachusetts versus Marbury, I think is the name of it. But there again,
I think I've heard RFK Jr. mention that one.
Yes, and so bottom line is, the state tried to mandate vaccines, and turns out that you could just pay a fine, and you wouldn't. And that's what the Supreme Court said. He said, well, he didn't want to take it, so you could just pay a fine. So anytime they tell you you're mandatory to have vaccines, when I was a kid, we used to go to parties every summer where you would be exposed to kids that had chickenpox, mumps, German measles, and red measles. And you had to have all four of those in order to have a lifelong immunity. The thing is, when you have your own immune system create immunity, it's a lifelong immunity. When you have an impressed immunity, which is you take these irradiated cells and you create the antibodies and you inject it with it, you get like 10-year immunity, and then you end up getting sick. We've had whole boats full of sailors that were all fully vaccinated that were quarantined away from ports for like 90 days because of outbreaks of childhood diseases that they were never contacted originally, and then ended up getting exposed to it, and they had no protection because they had no natural immunity. They had the impressed immunity. And that's what we were trying to do with the COVID thing. It was like, well, if you've been around people that had COVID and you get a little dose of COVID, you'll never get COVID, you know? And the reason why they have so many flu vaccines is because there's hundreds of varieties of the rhinovirus that causes flu, and there's no way you could be inoculated against all of them. But the advantage is that if you get a little bit of exposure to it, you can your own immune system, if it's properly functioning, and if you have iodine in your system, then you'll be able to overcome that.
Well, excellent, Joseph. Excellent, very good. We can go on and on.
Yes, I guess we could. How much time have we got?
Well, actually, we're over right now.
I was wondering. I didn't see a clock on the wall, so there you go, folks. You got the bonus hour.
There you go.
But it's so much fun researching stuff, and I really hope you enjoy reading my articles and sharing truth, because there's not enough of it to go around.
Well, thank you, Joseph. Thank you for being on the show tonight. It's an amazing topic, and you really filled us up with ideas and information, content that we really weren't aware of. And I just think we're in the most fascinating time, right now. And so these kind of conversations are stimulating, and I think that the best is yet to come.
God bless you.
Same to you. And this is Chris Heasley with the Chris Heasley Radio Show. We will be back next week with one more hot topic. Have a great week.
A Mike Kahn presentation. Coming to you from Radio DeBang, the North America's premier broadcasting network.
The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Radio DeBang, a Mike Kahn presentation.